Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the most important recording projects ever. This one was suggested to me by one of you, and I'm only too happy to give my wholehearted agreement. It's the Colin Davis Berlioz cycle for Philips, which is now Decca, of course, and here is a piece of it. I have it sitting around in various places, but here's a good chunk. This is the complete orchestral and sacred works. Now, Colin Davis's Berlioz cycle, sorry about that, it's my water. You ever do this? You freeze a bottle of water. It's really very, very nice, except it doesn't stand up properly anymore, and then, it falls. Anyway, Colin Davis's Berlioz cycle, right? Colin Davis and Berlioz were something of an unexpected occasion. You would think that a Berlioz person would be like, Charles Munch, whose Berlioz recordings were amazing, but who no way was RCA going to be persuaded to undertake an extensive cycle of his works. I mean, they did a bunch of stuff, and they did a fabulous box of things, but they didn't do a systematic exploration of Berlioz's output. And like that, in a way, it seems to me that the Colin Davis Philips stuff sort of took place rather slowly, because initially, he started life doing, I think he did an early L'Enfance du Christ, maybe for, what label was it on? I don't even remember. Loiselier or something strange. I don't know. And then he did the Symphonie Fantastique with the London Symphony Orchestra. And then it seemed that this whole thing started to take shape. And he started doing more Berlioz, and it was very highly acclaimed. And the record labels, or at least Philips, realized there really wasn't that much Berlioz. Aside from the Symphonie Fantastique and Harold in Italy, the two big orchestral pieces, Berlioz was not much explored as a composer. In particular, there was no great studio recording of Les Troyens, his operatic masterpiece, which is as big as any Wagner opera and better than all of them as far as I'm concerned. An amazing masterpiece. There was no Benvenuto Cellini, which is another masterpiece that's texturally a mess and very difficult to wrap your brain around, in terms of which version are you going to use. People just didn't care. Beatrice and Benedict, these works were just not performed. And there was also quite a bit of choral/orchestral music, because everything Berlioz did was kind of a hybrid, right? So people weren't recording it, and they weren't performing it, and they weren't listening to it. I mean, Berlioz has to be the most important composer that doesn't get listened to as regularly as he deserves to be, because he requires a real commitment of time and energy, and it's expensive. He wrote for gargantuan forces as often as not. And the music is very difficult and incredibly quirky and extreme in terms of its emotional range, and he's just hard to get to for everybody, for the performers, for the listeners, for the record labels. God knows they know he's not going to sell like crazy. It's difficult. So Colin Davis somehow had to reach a position of eminence in which his right to do Berlioz would be unquestioned. And he succeeded in doing that. And that gave him the opportunity to actually do Les Troyens twice, which is once for the LSO label, because he remade a lot of this stuff. It became, he realized the dream and really what ought to be a career plan for just about any major conductor. Find a composer and make him yours. Own the repertoire. Colin Davis was not your typical English conductor in that sense, because I know this is a grotesque generalization, so please don't give me the old, Hurwitz hates the English business, because I don't. I love the English, and I love English music, and I love English music people, and they're all wonderful. I don't like English critics. That's a different thing. Generally, there's some wonderful ones. Sorry, Rob, I love you. Anyway, the bottom line is that Colin Davis was a conductor of great extremes himself. He was, kind of manic, and he could be on and just on fire and spontaneous, or he could be really off, but he was never cold. He was not, what you expect from, the cool, reserved English conductor, the Malcolm Sargents, and the boatload of very good, very well qualified English conductors who just didn't have a lot of personality, like Neville Mariner and people like that. There were a bunch of those, and they became a stereotype in themselves, which is unfair, because you have to listen to everybody individually and take them as they come. I mean, one of my very favorite conductors was Sir Charles Groves. I think was just kind of amazingly musical and characterful and open to music. And of course, there was Beecham, who was a total eccentric. And enough of the stereotyping. Let me just say that the fact that Davis got his hands on Berlioz was a serendipitous thing for him, for us, and for Berlioz himself. You would have thought that some French conductor after Munch would have championed Berlioz, but it never happened. First of all, because there weren't that many, it seems, really great French conductors after Munch. I mean, that was a problem in and of itself. And second of all, because the French musical establishment, which had been taken over by Pierre Boulez, who was, couldn't stand Berlioz, basically, it turned against Berlioz, against the idea of erecting a palace to Berlioz. Berlioz has never been accepted in France the way he deserved to be. Even in his own lifetime, Berlioz gained acceptance in Germany. That was where he had the most opportunity to perform his works and where his works were most enjoyed and were most successful. It wasn't in France. So forget about France. So it had to come from elsewhere. Colin Davis stepped into it. Stepped into that mold, stepped into the gap. He didn't step in it. He stepped into the gap. Stepping in it is a whole nother issue, isn't it? So, let's take this box and just talk about some of the discoveries and wonderful things that were in here. Well, he did the Symphonie Fantastique a zillion times. And I actually didn't think that was the work that he responded best to. I like his London Symphony first recording. This contains the Concertgebouw recording, which is the one that lots of people wanted us to think is one of the references for the Symphonie Fantastique, and I guess we'll talk about that eventually. And we'll see where it lands. I'm not giving away the secret. But for me, that was always an extremely beautiful and well-played but studied performance. And Colin Davis is at his best when he was not studied. But then you have Tristia. Well, who ever heard of Tristia before this came out? What was a Tristia? It's a triptych, partly for chorus and orchestral. It's got the funeral march from Hamlet and Ophelia doing something. And it's just this weird 3 pieces. Wonderful music. Absolutely marvelous. And then Lilio, the sequel to the Symphonie Fantastique. Now, yes, that was recorded. It was recorded by Martinon, for example, in the 60s. And that's also totally bizarre. But it does have a fantasia on Shakespeare's The Tempest, which is pretty amazing, and some other things. It's supposed to be like the return to life after the hallucinogenic craziness of the Symphonie Fantastique, but it's just as hallucinogenic and just as crazy. The Grand Symphonie Funèbre et Triomphale. This is still one of its best, actually, probably recording. Really fantastic recording. An amazing work for a huge wind band here with its optional strings and choir. You could get some wind band things from France with Désiré Dondaigne and the Musique des Gardiens de la Pays, or one of those French municipal band groups in their squeaky, screechy, intonationally challenged way. So that was fun. But this was a studio production. Since then, it's been recorded a few times, but none of them matched this. Harold in Italy, which he did a couple of times. And we have the prelude from Les Troyens in Carthage, the Trojans in Carthage, which was discarded later when the complete work was reassembled in the way Berlioz intended. Then you've got the Berlioz overtures, Romeo and Juliet, L'Enfance du Christ, The Damnation of Faust, a very fine one, of a work that seems to have had lots of trouble on records coming off as well as it could. And this is definitely one of the better ones. The Requiem, which is the Berlioz Requiem, legendary, right? Billions of screaming people, gets recorded a surprising number of times. This one is a little bit on the smaller scale, but its intimacy only allows you to sort of, make sense of it better, to hear it with clarity. And I like the performance very much in any case. I think it's really powerful. especially the way he handles the timpani parts. The Te Deum, which nobody was playing when this was getting recorded. Again, there were versions. There were other versions, not many, but it's as massive, almost as massive as the Requiem. You've got to have an organ, and you've got to have all kinds of screaming people and multiple choirs. It's an extraordinary work. This was the piece that put it, the performance that put it on the map. Les Nuits d'été, we know he did it a few times with original singers and in various versions. And then the cantatas, The Death of Cleopatra, La Mort de Cléopâtre, and Herminie, or Hermine. No, Herminie, it's Herminie, that's the one, yes. His Prix de Rome cantatas that now are standard repertoire. His, 5 songs with orchestra. And it's really, that's it. It's really an amazing accomplishment. And then this does not even have Les Troyens, which is phenomenal. And the other operas, Benvenuto Cellini and Beatrice and Benedict. So the recording of all of this stuff, not a lot of works. It's not a lot of works. It's very interesting. Berlioz, he didn't write that much, but what he wrote was everything was a big, almost everything. I mean, not the songs, but, everything was a big statement. It was a statement, and it was strange. And it was like unlike anything anybody else did, and it still sounds as fresh and quirky as the day that he wrote it. And for that reason, it was a project that really needed to be done. It cried out for completion, by a charismatic conductor who could really enter into the spirit of the music. And Colin Davis was the guy. He was just the guy. He deserves full credit, and Phillips for sticking with him and doing this whole thing. Really an amazing project over a great many years, and one in which the highest artistic standards were maintained against some pretty serious odds. So there you have it. Certainly one of the most important recording projects ever. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.